Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the In Step with God podcast. I'm your host, JT Martin, and I'm super excited for what we've got to go through today. Today, we're going to be tackling chapter 10 in Fault Lines. This chapter is called Restoration and Migration. What I really appreciated about this chapter is the way Vodi kind of breaks it down. He hits a couple of the same points over again, and we're going to move through those. But first things first, I cannot sing the praises of this chapter enough. Those of you who have been with this process since the beginning, you know I started off very critical, very harsh in my analysis, and I've learned how to be more charitable as I've gone on. But overwhelmingly, chapter 10 has blown me away. From an academic standpoint, this book hasn't been the strongest all the time. But I can say with a pretty strong amount of comfort that chapter 10 is the most academically sound chapter of the entire book. And what's beautiful and what's amazing to me is that this is the chapter where he gets into what the hell do we do about what's going on. A huge portion of chapter 10 is dedicated to problem solving. Now, one of the things that he kind of reminds us of is that the lens of critical social justice and the byproduct, critical race theory. Remember, critical race theory is a tool. It is an element of the worldview of critical social justice. That's something that we learn early on in the book. And even though Vodi isn't always the most consistent about it, that's the way that I tend to understand the clarity of what he's writing. But what he gets into is that CRT views any disparity statistically as evidence of racism. That's what CRT does as far as Vodi is aware. So something that's a little bit more tedious in this section, it's on pages 202 to 203. It's about the 3/5 compromise. Vodi kind of argues against the notion that the 3/5 compromise was making the claim that slaves were 3/5 human. I understand why. It's a semantic thing. So I'm going to read you something from I'm going to read. So I'm going to read through the U.S. Constitution, a part of it that's quoted here. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. So this is where we get into some interpretive things. So one of the moves that you can take in interpreting this for what it means and what it says is that it's saying that that certain persons are 3/5 of a person. So I don't think that's fair to the legislature. I think that mathematically it is the same, but I don't think what's written is morally the same. I don't think what's written is to be frank. The context with which the 3/5 compromise comes into existence is not the greatest. The Three-Fifths Compromise came into existence because slaveholders wanted to be able to have a larger representation in Congress. And so, in order to ensure that, they were trying to make the argument that they should have, that their number of representatives should be decided by the total number of humans, of individuals, slaved or non-enslaved. It was the non-slaveholders who argued against it. And that's how the Three-Fifths Compromise came into existence. So what I am going to go ahead and just outright say is that the Three-Fifths Compromise cannot be viewed as articulating that individuals were, as people, as humans, seen as 3/5 of a person in the society, in the culture. It's not that. I don't think that's accurate. As far as the legislature is concerned, it came into existence because it was about votes. It was about representation. So here's a really good example. Imagine that you're with your family and you're in your car and you're arguing about where to go to dinner, right? And then all of a sudden somebody's like, well, if we each have one vote, who's going to be the tiebreaker? Well, everybody's already cast a vote. And then all of a sudden one of the parents or one of your kids says they have 2 votes. That doesn't make them worth 2 people. It has more to do with the weight upon which they bear in the system. So the way that here, so when I'm reading this piece of text, I don't think it's saying that they're 3/5 of a person. I think that it is more that the enslaved population is kind of seen as a voting block, and the voting block is only given 3/5 of a citizen's vote, for lack of a better term. And so in this regard, we're saying that a representative is the vote. And so what we're saying, what we're looking at is it's not that it's written to suggest that people are viewed as being 3/5 of a person. It's that a whole group of people are afforded 3/4, are viewed as 3/4 of the representatives that would be given to full citizens. And that's where it's difficult. It's not, I don't like it, but it doesn't mean that they're 3/5 of a person. There's a difference between saying that they are going to get an additional number of representatives according to 3/5 of their enslaved population. That is, in my eyes, that is a different statement, at least in Voddie's eyes. To my eyes, in a certain extent, but not as much as Voddie's. I want to make that distinction. Voddie is arguing that it's completely different, that there is no similarity between affording representatives according to 3/5 of a population of non-citizens and saying that non-citizens are 3/5 of a person. Mathematically, I recognize that they're basically the same. But it's kind of wacky. So this is why I think it's a poor representation. How many people are there per representative? I don't know. I don't need to know. But I know it's not a 1-to-1. So that representative isn't morally worth or considered as more than one person. It is still one person. His voice just so happens to represent a certain number of people. So here's the way that I see it. The three-fifths compromise has less to do with the moral positioning of a person and more to do with the ratio of representatives to population. The way that I would, in terms of articulating it in modern day language, it would be like if a law was passed. I'm not saying this is good, I'm just saying this is a better representation. It would be like saying that certain portions of the population have a different ratio of person to representative. So what we're really seeing here is it's not that they're 3/5 of a human, it's that the ratio of representative to total person of representative to population is 3/5 of the representation afforded from representative to full citizens. I'm sorry, that got super complicated. This has been really, really hard for me to think through. I've written my notes on this like 6 different times, and it's just been really, really hard. So I know that there was a whole lot that just got said, so I'm going to kind of recondense my last point. The three-fifths compromise in modern language says more, it's establishing a different ratio of representative to population. What it does is not analyze whether or not a person is a full person or not, or a full citizen. It's addressing how many representatives are given as a representative of the enslaved number of individuals. So in other words, what's happening is it's not that enslaved people are 3/5 of a person. It's that the ratio of representative to population is multiplied by 3/5. It's a establishment of a different ratio, not an establishment of different moral existences. With that being said, we're going to move on. So I'm going to just read something that this is all Vody. This book is, among many things, a plea to the church. I believe we are being duped by an ideology bent on our demise. This ideology has used our guilt and shame over America's past, our love for the brethren, and our good and godly desire for reconciliation and justice as a means through which to introduce destructive heresies. We cannot embrace, modify, baptize, or Christianize these ideologies. We must identify, resist, and repudiate them. We cannot be held hostage through emotional blackmail and name-calling. Instead, we must see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. That's Colossians 2:8. So a huge piece of what Vody is saying is hey, we can't, let ourselves be taken advantage of by philosophies that seem to be solving a problem. This gets into the heresy of American pragmatism in theology. We think that something is theologically correct if it's working towards solving a problem in our minds. That's not how reality works. Just because something works doesn't mean it was built for that job. Doesn't mean that it was built for that purpose. Doesn't mean that that's the way God intended us to go about something. Case in point, everybody knows you can use scissors to unscrew certain types of bolts. That doesn't mean the scissor is a screwdriver. Tools are tools, and they have intended purposes. Why are we arguing about whether or not a tool is appropriate when the founders and creators of those tools view them as a weapon against Christianity? And this is where we get into a couple of headline sections. So this is where it's just really well put together. He has kind of a subtitle, "We Are at War." He's sounding the war drum. He's moving through. But this is something that I think is absolutely critical. Many modern Christians are uncomfortable with war language. This is all Vody. Perhaps it is because of the aforementioned 11th commandment, "Thou shalt be nice." That's a reference to something earlier in the book. As a result, anything that looks or sounds remotely aggressive, confrontational, or masculine is deemed less than Christian. But the Bible is replete with war language in actual war, and that language is appropriate here because we are at war, but we must not rely on ordinary tactics. So this is where he gets into the fact that CSJ literally identifies Christianity as part of the problem. Not, hear me clearly, it is not talking about some warped form of Christianity as being the problem. I've read the literature that he's talking about here. It literally identifies biblical Christianity in the context of what it's talking about as being the problem, as being part of the problem. So CSJ is completely antithetical, incompatible with biblical Christianity because it identifies biblical Christianity as one of the problems it's trying to solve. Vody reminds us that our war is spiritual, that our weapons are spiritual. And there's something that he gets into on 2:10 and 2:11 is this idea that we fight with truth, and we fight with unity. It's that we fight with the truth of the gospel, we fight with the truth of biblical justice, and we fight with the unity of the body. This gets into Galatians 2 when we think about it. It's that I have been crucified with Christ, and it's not I who live, but Christ who lives in me. In this life I live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who gave himself up for me and loved me. That's the core. We are crucified with Christ. Christ lives in us. The more of me that people see, the less of Christ that people perceive. I'm really hoping I'm coming across clearly to you guys, because Vody is right on point in this chapter. Now then, the bit about the three-fifths compromise, here or there, that's not of critical importance, in all honesty. The critical importance to me is that the critical social justice movement is antithetical to Christianity because it identifies Christianity as being part of the problem. Second Corinthians 10:5 says this: "We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God." So if God has decreed something and something disagrees with it in argument or ideology, it is up to us. We are commanded to destroy the arguments that stand in opposition to the knowledge of God. Something that we got into earlier on, which is why I'm not going to get back into it, but he repeats kind of the reality that Black Lives Matter is built upon bearing false witness. He gets into the Marxist origins. He gets into the LGBTQ stuff. He gets in, and then he gets into something that I think is interesting. He talks about how the language of Black Lives Matter is anti-male and anti-family. That's since been changed, although I don't know if the heart behind that change was genuine. I can't judge that. Only God can. Something that he really gets into is that we have to confront the lie and hold to the truth. We must listen with discernment. We must correct them. This is critical. It's the idea that no matter what's going on, we have an obligation to take every thought captive, analyze everything that we think about, confront lies, and hold to the truth. We have to cling to Christ, cling to the gospel, cling to the truth of God's word, and in so doing, drive out every lie from our philosophies, from our theologies, from our perspectives. We must listen with discernment. We must not listen with our hearts, but listen with our minds in accordance with the scriptures, taking every thought captive, taking every thought captive. You're going to hear me repeating this a lot because the point is there, and he makes it excellently. With that being said, that was brutal. Chapter 10 of Fault Lines was done exceptionally well. I could not be prouder of the academic work, the citations. Everything was put where it needed to be put. Well formatted, well written, well done. Now then, couple updates. Friday morning on September 17th, y'all will be getting a special treat. Me and Zach, the host of Adherent Apologetics, are going to be teaming together to talk about how apologetics has been part of our spiritual formation. This is going to be a super cool episode. I've known Zach for a number of years, and it's really exciting to finally be teaming up with him. So with that being said, really excited about that. Down the line in the future, we'll also have Scott Gordon joining us. He's a top Mormon apologist, and he and I are going to be talking about what kind of the Latter-day Saint distinctives, as it were, to try and give everybody a full picture of what a mature Latter-day Saint theology looks like. And then Zach McCrae, an assistant from Ratio Christi down in Houston, is going to be joining us at some point to discuss the Unapologetic Evangelism Conference that happened in Kingwood the other weekend, and that's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of really good things coming down. We're almost done with Fault Lines, and then we'll be taking a little bit of a break. So just bear with me. We've got 2 more weeks to work through some stuff, and then we're going to be flying out of here super excited, ready to take every thought captive. Again, this is In Step with God. I am your host, JT Martin. I and this channel is completely dedicated to educating and encouraging curious Christians. We'll see you next time. God bless.